Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. To kick things off, let's check in on the big strategic picture from the front lines in Ukraine. Russian forces are starting to feel the heat, not just in military engagements, but financially as well. Ukrainian counteroffensives are forcing Russia to pull back and rethink its positions. Most recently, in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, Ukraine's forces have made significant progress, regaining over 400 square kilometers of territory. Areas that were once under heavy Russian control are now in Ukrainian hands, particularly in the Oleksandrivka and Huliaipola directions. What's been key in these advances is the strategic importance of roadways and logistics routes. Ukrainian forces are not just fighting for territory, they're cutting off Russian supply chains, which, as we've seen, is a game changer in modern warfare. What's fascinating here is that the Russian military is shifting into a defensive mode. That's a major sign that Ukraine's counterattacks are beginning to disrupt Russian plans. They've already forced Russia to pull back some of their 5th Combined Arms Army units that were supposed to push westward from Huliaipol toward Orikhiv, a major Ukrainian stronghold. This shift in focus from offense to defense is no small thing. The Kremlin has been gearing up for a large spring offensive, but Ukraine's advances are forcing Russia to deal with more pressing issues. If you look at the big picture, it's becoming clear. Russian forces are spread thin, and their ability to conduct large-scale operations is being tested by these Ukrainian counterattacks. Moving to the political realm, let's talk about what's going on with Russian foreign policy. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made some bold claims on March 16th. He rejected any form of negotiation unless all of Russia's territorial demands were met. We're talking about the complete cession of Donbass, which Russia now considers its territory, even if Ukrainian forces are still holding on. Lavrov's comments were about more than just territory. They were about asserting Russia's broader vision for Ukraine, one where Moscow controls the narrative and political direction, including the ousting of the Ukrainian government. This stance hasn't budged since the war started, and it shows no sign of changing anytime soon. Russia is also pushing back hard on any peacekeepers or international mediation efforts, especially ones involving NATO or the European Union, which they consider unacceptable. Now let's zoom out a bit and take a look at Russia's financial situation. Military spending in Russia is climbing to unsustainable levels. It now accounts for 50% of the country's national budget. This is a massive strain on their finances, especially since oil and gas revenues are down significantly. According to recent reports, Russia's federal budget deficit is ballooning, and the government has been forced to sell off gold reserves to keep things afloat. So, while Russia is pouring more and more money into its military efforts, the economic pain is starting to hit home. The Kremlin is trying to stabilize things with cuts to federal spending and tax hikes, but there's only so much they can do when their largest income streams, oil and gas, are being attacked from all sides. A significant part of this economic struggle is also the international sanctions that have severely impacted Russia's ability to export oil to Europe. This is where the shadow fleet of Russian tankers comes into play. Tankers used to circumvent sanctions and keep oil flowing to global markets. However, this is becoming more difficult by the day, especially with Ukrainian strikes on key Russian refineries and oil infrastructure. This situation is further complicated by the damage to the Arctic Metagas, a Russian LNG tanker that's been drifting aimlessly in the Mediterranean since it was attacked by Ukrainian naval drones earlier this month. The European Commission is getting involved, warning that the vessel's state poses an ecological risk, and it's clear that this type of disruption could slow down Russia's efforts to keep the money flowing. Let's shift gears to something a bit different: the issue of foreign fighters. Russia has been quietly recruiting from around the globe, and the numbers are staggering. Over 1,700 people from 36 countries, many of them from Africa, have reportedly joined Russian forces. The most significant recruitment effort has been in Kenya, where it's believed that over 1,000 Kenyans have been sent to fight for Russia, many under the false pretense of getting civilian jobs. The Kenyan government has officially stepped in to stop these efforts, and after talks with Russia, They announced that Kenyans will no longer be recruited to fight in the war. However, this still raises a lot of questions about Russia's tactics. What's interesting is the broader international implication. As Russia struggles to maintain its manpower at home, it's been reaching out to vulnerable populations in countries like Kenya, Ghana, and Cameroon. The question is whether this will spark more diplomatic pressure from the international community or if it'll just continue to be swept under the rug. On the military side of things, Russia's continued efforts to use drones as part of its hybrid warfare tactics are still in full swing. The Sandworm Group, Russia's cyber division, responsible for some of the most destructive attacks in recent years, is still active, particularly targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure. We've seen them use wipers and other malware to wipe out critical data, disrupting the ability to communicate and operate effectively. But here's the kicker. Russia is now using these cyber operations to destabilize Europe too, especially with attacks on countries that are part of NATO or close to Ukraine's borders. It's clear that the cyber front is becoming just as critical as the physical one, and it's a major focus for the Russian military as they try to find ways to retaliate against Ukraine's increasing successes. Finally, the geopolitical chess game continues, and it's clear Russia's actions are no longer just impacting Ukraine. There's growing concern in NATO countries about Russian activity along their borders, and it's not just military. Russia is pushing its influence through propaganda and cyber operations. The European Union continues to increase sanctions on Russia, but there's also a continued focus on diplomatic channels. Russia is trying to expand its network of allies, but with countries like Iran and China walking a fine line in their support, it's clear that the Kremlin is still largely isolated in the international community. As for Europe, there's some tension between member states on how to handle Ukraine's financial aid, especially with Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban blocking parts of the €90 billion EU financial support package. Orban is demanding Ukraine reopen the Druzhba oil pipeline, a pipeline that Russia once used to send oil to Hungary. This political maneuvering is putting pressure on Ukraine as they try to balance the immediate need for support while pushing back against demands that they believe would undermine sanctions against Russia. Thanks for listening and helping grow our community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.